this episode of Survive and Thrive 8791, the podcast where we share stories that make you cry, laugh, and think. We dive into Brian Kenney's journey through a gambling disorder, a gripping account of struggle, accountability, and recovery. Hear how Brian uses his life experience to help others and advocates for those facing similar challenges. This will be a good one. Here we go.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. What is up? Wherever you are, whatever you are doing, I hope you are having a great day. Welcome to another episode of Survive and Thrive 8791. I'm your host, Coach Decora. We are in the Buck and Honey's remote studios, and for the first time, we are in my hometown of Wisconsin Dells, Wisconsin, just 45 minutes north of our great capital city, Madison, Wisconsin. You can follow the podcast on Spotify, Apple Music, iHeartRadio, YouTube at Survive and Thrive 8791. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at TDecora 8791, as well as hitting me up on Facebook at Tim Decora. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to the show. Leave me a comment if you liked what you heard. If there's a topic or you know a guest who would love to tell their story, email me at tdecora@gmail.com. Glad you could join us today wherever you happen to be. Our mission is to share stories and conversations that make you cry, laugh, and think, stimulating emotions, creating laughter, and inspiring the mind. A new episode will be released on Monday and Thursday morning featuring a wide range of guests. The podcast will touch on many subjects such as grief, loss of a loved one, recovery, professional setback, divorce, success despite challenges, etc., etc., etc. Our guests will share how they learn to survive and thrive. So I'm going to set this up and introduce our guest here shortly, but according to the internet, and as we know, the internet is always right, gambling disorder affects about 1% of Americans. Now, doesn't seem like a whole lot of people, but when you consider that in 2023, the census for the United States of America, 335 million people. So that is 3.35 million people who can't stop despite the consequences gambling. Gambling covers more than a trip to the casino or an illicit poker game. It includes lotteries, online poker, and sports betting. And there's a debate over whether it also includes daily fantasy sports leagues. Today, we welcome Brian Kenney to the Buck and Honey's remote studios. Kenney is owner of Team Extreme, a team building company specializing in hands-on customized team building events on site. He'll come see you. He's very passionate about assisting all teams in improving their leadership skills and abilities to harness team cohesion. A servant educator for 25 years, and we're going to get to that in a little bit. Kenney spent time as a special education teacher and a transition consultant, which have contributed to his ideas and passion for helping teams grow. He resides in Wisconsin Dells, Wisconsin, with his children, Griffin, who's almost 16, and Sienna, who's almost 13. In his free time, he enjoys officiating basketball, football, and timing track and field events across multiple levels. His other passions include fishing and woodworking. Brian Kenney, welcome to the show. What is up?
Everything.
Everything. The sky's up. How the heck you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing great. Hey, you know, it's nice to be back in Wisconsin Dells, Wisconsin, although we're up the line a little bit, creeping close to Adams Friendship.
Yeah, we don't want to do that. You're in Green Devil territory.
We are in Green Devil territory. Always had friendly rivalries with the Green Devils. So I do have to make a comment, and some of you that are able to watch see that Brian Kenney is wearing a sweet looking shirt, Survive and Thrive 8791 shirt coming to the merch store anytime soon. And I'm wearing the Merry Christmas for Chris Middleton from the Bucks.
That's a really nice sweatshirt, by the way. That's a quality item.
Because when we, let's see here, we're filming this and recording this, it is Christmas Eve. So happy Christmas. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you, too. The 8791 must be the years you were blessed to be in the Dells.
Blessed to graduate from the Dells in 87 and 91. Blessed to graduate from the University of Wisconsin, Platteville. Well, I actually finished there. I graduated in 92, so we're kind of dating myself there a little bit. But anyway, We talked a little bit about the officiating, and it seems like I've known you from the officiating or refereeing forever. I think I knew you as an official first, and then I realized I asked you, where do you work? And you said, I work in the Devils, for crying out loud. So you just transitioned from fall to winter. How was the fall season?
Fall is special because football involves being with the same 5 people every Friday night. And I really enjoy that because we develop camaraderie and cohesion. So it's just a special time because we're together. Whereas in basketball, I'm with different people all the time. My football crew is typically the same 5 guys every Friday night, and we develop a 9-week relationship, and then obviously the playoffs. My football crew is, there's a text message going out to someone showing appreciation or joy, or it's a good friend, because my circle is, fairly small. As you get older, I think your circle shrinks. Mm-hmm. The 5 people on my football crew, I should say 4, including myself, we're tight. We communicate regularly. If I have questions or if I have something that I need support on, I'm going to go to them. I mean, they know a lot about me. And we have to, because there's a level of trust in football officiating that's very high.
Transitioning then from fall to winter season is approaching the halfway point already. I can't believe that. But I got to ask, which season is your favorite?
I like the second half of the basketball season better than the first half because there's just more at stake. The first half of the season is tournaments, non-conference games. Teams are still finding out who they are. And you get in the second half of the season in January, and especially into February. As you know, you played. It gets harder, and there's more at stake because you're getting closer to conference championships. You're getting closer to, your seed in the postseason, and the games just get more intense.
So is summertime the time you aren't wearing the stripes?
Well, it's funny because I do a lot of training of officials. So I run a high school officiating camp in Marshfield called the 3 Zebras camp. 3 zebras because there's 3 of us on the court.
And you look like zebras.
Exactly. And I also run a college recruiting and talent pipeline camp.
I was going to say maybe before I leave here, I take some of your cards because it seems like every high school basketball, youth basketball, middle school basketball games, I see a lot of aspiring referees sitting in the crowd, screaming and yelling, saying, travel, double dribble, call it both ways.
Call it both ways. That's a good one.
I think I might take some cards and hand those out because anybody that is out or that is listening today, I will have Brian Kenney's information on one of the press releases or promos for this, and I will get you his information if you are looking into being an official, because we do need them. So our sponsor, Buck and Honey's Restaurants, have roots that started here in Wisconsin Dells. Owner Tom Anderson is a graduate of Wisconsin Dells High School. His restaurants in Sun Prairie, Monona, Wanakee, and Mount Horeb have the same great food and drink menu, 5-star customer service, and welcoming and vibrant atmosphere that his dad's restaurant, Bomberino's, had back 30 plus years ago. With 4 locations in Dane County, there's always one close by. Have you been to Buck and Honey's?
I have. The one in Monona Grove.
One in Monona. We're going to hop right into segment number 1. You reached out to me probably a month or so ago about wanting to come and tell your story on the podcast. And I'm glad you did, because I'm trying to feature people who have gone through something, survived, and then are thriving. And we've already talked about former teacher. We've also talked about you owning your business and doing a lot of things, and then you're officiating. You wanted to talk about your gambling disorder. We've talked off air a little bit that when people get into recovery, whatever it happens to be for, there's always that, we follow that theme on the podcast here, where we talk about what was it like, and then what happened, what is it like now? So we're going to address the first 2. What was it like before gambling, and then kind of what happened, and then we'll dive into the what happened a little bit, and then we'll venture off to segment number 2. So we've known each other for a long time, but for some of our listeners who may not know who you are or much about you, What was your life like growing up? Family life? Were you always around sports? I know you said you're from the Milwaukee area, so I'm going to let you go ahead and tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. My parents are born and raised in Milwaukee. My dad is someone that was a very hard worker, provided for us. I was fortunate to be able to go to private schools pretty much my whole life other than kindergarten. I went to St. Veronica's Elementary School, and then I went to an all-boys Catholic high school in Milwaukee called Thomas More, which is now, of course, it goes co-ed, the year after I graduate. And actually, a funny story, I'm going to go to UW Platteville, and I was going to play for Coach Christ. And I toured the campus, and I remember leaving the campus and telling my dad, Dad, there's just no girls on campus. I don't know if I can do that. And so I didn't end up going to Platteville. I ended up going to Marquette University. So I'm pretty fortunate to be first grade through 16th grade was all Catholic education because Marquette's Jesuit.
Oh, yeah.
So it's a Catholic school. And that just kind of gave me this foundation of how to behave, how I'm supposed to respond to adversity. I had great role models in my parents. My dad was an official. I remember going to football games and standing on the sidelines holding this clip that you put on the chains and doing that job, watching my dad, manage the chaos on the sideline. And then I started refereeing with him in the Catholic League in Milwaukee, which was great basketball. And my dad would ref with me on weekends. And in the Air Force, I joined the Air Force right out of high school.
Yep.
Really wanted to be a pilot. I had my mind dead set on being a pilot. And we'll kind of come back to that. That was one of the things that really kind of interrupted my life. Sports-related injuries really plagued me, and concussions. And that really led me to a place where I couldn't become a pilot anymore. I couldn't pass the vision test. So my 20/20 vision, I lost it with the concussions from football. So that really just plateaued me into a very bad place. And that's kind of where gambling kind of met me, was through the lens of, being depressed from, I can't be a pilot anymore. This is what I wanted to do with my life. And feeling just like I couldn't do that anymore. And gambling just provided this euphoria for me. And, gambling back then it was a payphone. There was no internet gambling. It was, you're calling a bookie and you're making bets. And I just kind of fell in love with the obsession of making a bet, whether it was a single game that I was betting on, the over-under, the line, or maybe it was a parlay or a 10-teamer. And this just became an obsession for me that kind of replaced the guilt and the feeling of failing.
Probably gave you that rush of, I mean, I would have to probably say that along somewhere that I like to gamble. I'll admit it. But I don't do much of it anymore. But I tell you what, there's nothing that used to replace when you knew you were going to win some money because of how the dogs ran, the cards you got in your hand, you got that little boost of dopamine, and you felt that rush that probably, unfortunately, replaced the feel of being in the cockpit of a plane or wanting to be able to fly a plane at some point.
Right. And then you come from this family that's, values were everything, and your ethics and your morals. And then you start hiding it, and trying to protect your gambling. And I think that's something that addicts often do, is try to hide what they're doing from other people, or they minimize it or maybe sugarcoat it. It's not that bad. And it's really hard to think about tracking someone down for gambling when it was just a payphone. Now there's internet gambling. You can see the URLs that people are visiting. Where for me, it was all on a payphone. Didn't have a cell phone back then.
No internet.
It was the put 35 cents in the payphone and, call the bookie, and you have to make your bets on a phone.
So let's go back, and I'm sure when you started to get some help, and we'll talk about the help kind of in segment 2, but when you probably reached out and said, hey, I need some help, did they go back and say, hey, let's go and start at the beginning and see where this all started? Was it cards? Was it dice? Was it fantasy sports? Do you kind of have a point of where you think it might have started? That because you probably got that little boost somewhere along the line at an early age. Do you recall that?
My parents were always card players. We learned the value of working hard through the lens of cards. You didn't win a game of Uno in my house by accident. You had to get really good at playing. No one was going to let you win. And we played sheep's head, cribbage, euchre, all the typical Wisconsin games. We played, and I never felt like that was a problem. For me, I looked at cards as just something competitive. And I'm sure you can probably relate to this. It's just something that it's never going to leave me. And I have to feed that through other mechanisms, which is why I referee. It's why I don't sit still.
When did you, this will kind of tease us for the segment too, is when did you know something might not be right with the gambling? Was there a point or two where you thought, man, I don't think I should be, this has got to stop?
I was very fortunate when I was in college. I had, I had revenue streams. You hear a lot of people tell about, like, in college they didn't have any money. I was just the opposite. I bartended at a very good restaurant called Rudy's, which is now closed. It was a Mexican restaurant downtown. All the Bucks players and the Brewers players would come in there, and they were big tippers. And I always had money from bartending. And I had my job in the Air Force, and then I also officiated. So I think for me, gambling didn't really become a problem until the revenue to pay off the debt became a problem. So like your tip money from bartending, the cash from officiating, I think that's a byproduct of, I should have been saving that money, and I should have been using that for more wise things. And instead, it was feeding this machine of gambling where you're betting and you're trying to recuperate the bet that you lost. So you make a bigger one. And then it just becomes this like snowball that's down the hill and it's gaining momentum. And you're trying to pay for these debts, and then your revenue, it's like a business. Your profits have to be higher than your debt, or you're just going to be at a break even, or you're going to be in the negative. And I think that's how gambling worked. For me, that's when I started to panic, when I was spending more money than I was making. And that's when I was like, I got a problem. This is not good.
Yeah, no, you make a lot of good points of feeding that addiction, and then we'll talk about a little more in depth of you win some and then you lose maybe a little more, so you're always, I got to replace that, and you're doing the math in your head, and I should bet a little more this time because that's going to replace the loss, and then, like you said, it snowballs. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in segment 2. So Buck and Honey's has been with us since episode 1, and I'm darn glad for their support and friendship. Some people ask me, why Buck and Honey's? It's a great menu, 5-star customer service. Owner Tom Anderson places a high priority on mental health of his employees by having a mental health professional on call for them. And for me, there's nothing like enjoying a night out to make you feel better. In segment 2, Brian Kenney is going to take us through what it was like to be Brian Kenney, the gambler, and the coping skills it has taken to survive and thrive. So please stay tuned. Don't change that dial. You don't want to miss segment 2 of Survive and Thrive 8791. We will be back. If you, a loved one, or someone you know who is experiencing a physical, mental, or emotional crisis, there is help or resources out there. Contact NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness helpline, at 1-800-950-6264. This is a free service providing information, resource referrals, and support to people living with a mental illness, their family, providers, and the public. United Way 211 is available. 24/7, 365, and offers free confidential assistance. They connect people with the local programs and services that can help. Dial 211. Crisis Services, dial 911. Suicide Prevention Lifeline, call 988. To connect via web chat, go to suicidepreventionlifeline.org. Along with those numbers, there is help. You just need to utter 3 words: I need help. Now back to the show. All right, we are back. Welcome to segment 2 of Survive and Thrive 8791, where we feature guests who share their stories in hopes of helping others who may be struggling with what life throws at them. Gambling started at an early age with card games and different, and you called them Wisconsin card games, but you always wanted to be good at it. It was just like playing a sport. You wanted to get better at playing cards, and along the way, that kind of fueled you for, well, hey, I can play cards. Maybe now I can play cards for a little bit of money. And then, there's other things that we can bet on, and I can also win some money. So probably led you down the road. So you always knew gambling was a bad idea. And you talked about being raised in the private school atmosphere where there was probably some faith-based tied to that, and that you could always stop when you got ahead. And when you sent me your bio, I really liked how you set this up. You would get 2 steps ahead, and that would mean you would win. And then at times, probably more times than not, I'm going to guess, was fall 2.5 steps back. Can you kind of explain that for the listeners? And we have listeners that maybe aren't into gambling, but they're looking for the coping skills, because you can apply some of these coping skills that you're going to share with us in a little bit for really anything. But explain for the listeners the 2 steps forward, 2.5 steps back, if you can.
I think behind every addiction, there's somebody who's enabling it, or they're sabotaging you, and they're giving you bad information. Like if you're a drug addict, you have somebody who's providing you the drugs, a dealer. And when you're gambling, back in the 90s, you were going to find a 1-800 number, and you were just going to call some bookie. And on the other end of the phone, they don't know you, and this person has a sales pitch. So they're promising you the moon, and they're promising you the stars, and then you're already in a vulnerable place, so you're just getting sucked into that. And I remember the first bookie that I had, I couldn't tell you his name, but I just remember his voice. Hey, Brian, I got a great pick for you. It's a no fail.
It's a lock.
It's a lock. And you're a sucker for that. So then you bite on it. And then, maybe you win that one. And maybe they gave you that information because it was a lock. Maybe it was a game that was just so impossible for Team B to beat Team A. And the spread on that game was just a once in a lifetime, right? So you win that one. Now you're hooked. Making these ridiculous bets. And you're just listening to this person on the other end who, even if you win the bet, they're making money no matter what. Knowing what I know now, such a debilitating place, but you're so vulnerable. I think the vulnerability, this person's taking advantage of you. They're going to sabotage you either way. So the 4 paradigms, the Stephen Covey, the win-win, the lose-win, the win-lose, and the lose-lose. And when you're in that gambling cycle, just like a drug addict or any other, addiction, there's the cycle. You just never come to the terms with the sabotage that's going on and the lose paradigm that you're into. And once you're so far in, you're embarrassed. There's a lot of regret, shame. So you want to catch back up, and you just never do. So that's the analogy of, taking 3 or 4 steps forward and you're always taking more steps in reverse. And the canoe just never gets to the destination. Even though there's plenty of wind and there's plenty of oomph in your sails, you can't. It's like dog poop on a tire. It just keeps coming around and around and around. And I was in that cycle. And something has to break it.
So we're going to talk a little bit about that cycle and then kind of what you did to seek help. But for the listeners out there who are hearing some of these terms for the first time, I did have to go back to the bookie thing, and you kind of talked a little bit about this person who takes your phone call, builds you up, maybe has even given you kind of that, hey, here's a lock, because if I give you a lock 1 week, I might give you 2. Let's see if we can't talk Brian into 2 locks, and you just won last week on 1. I'm going to try 2, and more money means more money for the bookie. So the bookie is the person who receives and pays off the bets, and that could be a family friend of yours was one of your bookies, and did threaten you. That was when you thought, I need some help out of this, or I need to get out of this, and I need to do something. So what help did you seek when you thought, okay, this gambling is getting a little bit too deep, I'm spending too much money, I'm getting threatened? What help did you seek out?
So one of the things that happened to me was, we'll just call the infamous bookie that I couldn't remember his name, we'll just call him Fred. When I got tired of Fred, I remember a family friend who also struggled with gambling saying, hey, we need to talk to this guy. And people who are addicts make really senseless decisions often, and almost like dumb plus dumb equals dumb. So I'm like, yeah, let's get this family friend to be our bookie, and then we don't have to listen to the crazy voice of the salesman Fred. And I just thought, okay, let's do it. Well, that was just a horrible decision. That just doesn't end well. Now it's a person who's closer to you. They're no longer in San Diego, California on the other end of a phone line. They're in the same city you're living in. And he also struggled with gambling as well. So now he's going to lose his bets, but he's going to win the bets of everybody he's booking. So there's just this vicious cycle of me at the bottom end of the food chain gambling, and then somebody higher up is winning. When you lose, they win no matter what. The person who's the bookie is the win-win in the paradigm. It's never going to be the gambler. The bookie takes a grease fee every single time you win a bet. They're going to take a %. So no matter what happens, if you lose, you're paying them the bet that you lost, plus you're paying them a grease fee. The grease fee is basically a commission. If you win, the house is always going to win. Whether you're playing blackjack, whether you're playing roulette, Keno, it doesn't matter. They're all going to win. They win, not you.
You grab this family friend of yours, and you sense that things, you said, sort of kind of funny, dumb decision, dumb idea is going to still equal dumb. You got to a point where you were going to need to seek some help. What were some of your feelings like? And we touched a little bit off air on this, probably gets into the mental health a little bit, is that, how were you feeling? Were you feeling depressed, anxious? Yeah, you talked about stressed a little bit. What were you going through in those probably last couple days, weeks of before I need to quit this? What was that like?
One thing I always learned from my parents is anytime we ever did anything ridiculous, they were going to know about it. And this was no different. It was my mom found out because my mom is really, really smart. To this day, my mom is one of the smartest people I know. She found out from the family friend's wife, And she confronted me about it. And of course, when you're in the middle of a cycle, you're going to do what most addicts do, and you're going to lie. And you're not going to want to visit the truth.
Denial,
right? And so there's more guilt added on to the guilt that already happened before you were gambling from the incident with, not being able to be a pilot in the Air Force. And what I learned most is you just make everything worse. And I just felt like, okay, I'm in debt. I have to borrow money from my parents to pay for this. And now I'm more guilty than I was when I first started gambling. And then the shame and the embarrassment just keeps piling on. And finally, I just faced my demons. And I just said, I can't stop this without getting some kind of intervention or help. And being in the military, one of the best decisions I ever made was joining the Air Force, because the Air Force always wants to help you. And they stand by their soldiers. A coworker of mine actually struggled with gambling, and we started to talk about that. And now I have this person who I really like at work who's sharing their story, and I'm feeling like for once I have somebody I'm connected to, which I think is really valuable when you sit in vulnerability and you think you're by yourself. You're not. What you're doing with the podcast and your message about survive and thrive is just priceless, because everyone struggles. And it's really hard to be vulnerable and find people that you can trust.
Yeah, I think I found that if you tell your story enough, and again, I make reference to talking off air. We set a lot of this up with a little bit of a script. And I do know some people that gamble. Do they have an addiction? I don't know. That's for them to decide. It's not for me to decide. I don't know anybody other than you that have come forward and just said, hey, I had a problem with gambling, and I decided to get into a program for people to talk and share. And it sounds like you did one of the best things you could, and you decided to share with somebody, which is going to be one of the things you talked about, is share with somebody what's going on in your life. And lo and behold, you're not the only one.
No.
There was somebody else that was maybe sitting in the desk right across from you the whole time, and you didn't know. So you started getting some help those first few weeks, where you reached out to somebody. How did you start to feel? Did you go cold turkey and say, I'm not going to bet anymore? Or did you kind of wean yourself off? How did those first couple days, weeks, maybe month, when you made that call, I need to stop, I need to get some help? What was that like for you?
The amount of debt that was associated with this didn't it lend itself to weaning? It had to be all or nothing. It had to be cold turkey. Just like if I were smoking, I probably would go about it from that lens of, I'm just going to give this up and I'm going to find another. I think what really boded well for me was finding replacement strategies. That's kind of where the woodworking comes in. And, lucky for me, I have other hobbies that I could just pump up my other hobbies and then deflate this bad one. And I think that's a big thing for me, that was a saving grace. I can walk away from this because I have something I can replace it with. And I think that's a big problem for a lot of people. They just don't have the right resources or supports to implement some other way to feed the addictive personality.
And you did, with the help of the Air Force and your buddy that sat across from you. So now that you've started to understand your gambling disorder, and you already talked about addressing it with some coping skills, finding something else to fill that void, you've relied on some coping skills, strategies, tools for your gambling recovery toolkit. So if anybody's feeling like what Brian has mentioned, or a loved one is going through the same kind of thing, or a coworker going through what Brian did, Brian Kenney has 5 suggestions for you And in the recovery world, we know that if everything worked off of advice, nobody would have any issues.
Yeah.
So these are suggestions that Brian has, and they work for him. I mean, he's got experience where these have worked. So again, if you have somebody in your life or you are struggling with a gambling disorder, here are his suggestions. So the first one, I'll guide you through these, and I'll let you go on this. The first one was reach out for support, and you said call a trusted friend or family member. You kind of already touched on that. Was there more than just the coworker?
No, I think it was just having this person who I really respected, that I was around for a number of years. And I never knew that about him. And I think he could sense. I think people who are going through addiction, it's almost like they have a special radar where they can like sense someone's trauma, or they can sense when someone's just something's off. And he got just this vibe that things were just off for me. So he kept on like probing me. And I think that's really important, that we not let people try to like brush us off and push us away. It's fine because they're going to do that. It's just natural that you want to push people away, but we have to keep probing. Mm-hmm. And I think that's another, piece of advice too, is just find a way to probe at people to get them to let their guard down and let you in.
If you're on the other end of this whole situation, is start asking. And sometimes, and I've heard this in recovery as well, is the person who's in trouble is always the last one to know. Everybody else knows around them, whether it's a substance disorder, eating disorder, or in this case gambling. They're always the last one to know. Everybody else seems to know. So you already touched on this as well. Distract yourself with other activities. So when you talk about your woodworking, hit on that, and then talk about the officiating again. Let's come back to that.
Well, one thing that's just not good when you're officiating college basketball, and when I was in the heyday of my career, I'm on the downward, end of officiating now. Now I'm more focused on assigning and, mentoring. But when I was, climbing the ladder and I was working the NCAA tournament, you have to fill out a form. And the NCAA committee does not like gambling. They don't want officials to be active in, gambling. And obviously for logical reasons, sports wagering is a big problem. I would say gambling is probably up there with some other heavy hitter addictions that affects a lot of people my gender, a lot of men. Gambling is saying, no, that's not good for me. I play bags and I'll play euchre and I'll play cribbage, but there can't be any gambling at all. That's just not good for me.
Yeah, you hit on so many things that when I think about some of the other guests that we've had on the podcast, alcohol, substance, whatever it happens to be, you're talking the same lingo that they are, and you have that same talk and the same approach that you got to find a new sandbox to play in. You got to get out of the old sandbox and get to a different one. Find some new friends, and basically find that group that can support you. The next thing you talked about was postpone the gambling. And then I had to read this a little bit. Give yourself time. This may allow the urge to pass or weaken. And again, I've heard that too, is that this too shall pass.
I think it's really similar to somebody who's trying to get rid of, like cigarettes. The longer you go without it and the longer you can reward yourself for like the long haul, the harder it is to go back to it. And that first 14 days of trying to break a habit, I think is really hard. And that's where you just have to have a plan written down for how you're going to like shed all these urges.
Yeah,
it's really hard.
I really like what you're hitting on. Again, I'm hearing some of the same things, but again, I think you can apply it to anything. You can, if you're a drug addict, you can apply that to gambling and gambling to drug addict and substance use and eating disorders. Yeah, I'm hearing the same thing, and it's good, and it works. It works for you like it's worked for some of the other people I've had on here. So I like the next one. Stop for a moment and consider what will happen when you gamble. Even if you win, you lose. There's a thing I've heard in recovery is play the tape forward, which is very similar to what you said in your little statement here. Stop for a moment and consider what will happen. Play the tape forward if you put that money down, or if you decide, we'll play for $5, what that could lead to.
Oh, I talk to my kids about this all the time. Both my kids are into sports. Both of them have very intense personalities. They're very different. But I talk to them about focus on the canoe being upriver. Not what's behind the canoe, not what you're in right now. What's going on upriver? And that forces them to think about, like, what's the next couple days going to look like? What are the next 2 or 3 years going to look like? 5 years? You know, one of the best authors that I really enjoy talks about the process being more important than the product. Like, I'm invested in the process of not gambling, not being in an addiction cycle. And the product will take care of itself. It was Josh Metcalf. Burn Your Goals was the name of the book. And the whole concept is burn your goals and just be invested in the process. And the process for me is, I know who I am, I know where I want to be, and gambling isn't going to get me there ever. And I think you get that. If you didn't, you wouldn't be doing what you're doing.
Yeah, we talked, again, reference to off air. When I do these podcasts and interviews, not only are the listeners getting something out of it, but I'm also getting something for my program that I can use to strengthen what I'm doing. And I love the canoe.
Yeah.
I just love that canoe. If you do, for those of us that know, we've got the Wisconsin River.
Yeah, it's right behind us.
Right behind us. And you got a canoe, and you always got to be looking forward. You can't be looking, what's going on in the canoe right now. You got to worry a little bit about that, but you got to be really looking, especially if you're going with the current or if you're going up the current. There's a lot of stuff you got to worry about. The last item, avoid isolation. That's the kind of the last year 5 suggestions. So go ahead and hit that for about, I'm going to give you 90 seconds. Ready to go.
You haven't given me the time's up signal yet.
No, this is such tremendous content. And I told you, if it's good content, we're going to let you go. So talk about avoid isolation.
I think it's just a natural thing for people to go there when they're doing something that goes against their morals. And for me, like, I go back to my Christian education.
Faith-based education.
Yeah, faith-based. Gambling was just something you were supposed to avoid. It wasn't one of the 10 commandments, but it probably fits and weaves in there somewhere.
Might have been commandment number 12.
Yes. It was the TBD. Yeah. You just go to this isolating place because you're embarrassed. There's regret. There's probably a lot of, shame. And then you feel like you're the only one suffering. And then, it took me a while to figure out my friend also suffered. And then you have, you're not in isolation anymore. And nothing good comes from being isolated. I mean, I know this from just working with sports teams. So many kids, I think, struggle to be vulnerable with their teammates because they want to hide all their bad stuff. And that's just, you're just holding on to all that. And because if you do let it go, you don't want it to be on TikTok, or you don't want it to be on Instagram, or you don't want it to be on Snapchat or some kind of social media platform, because that could lead you to a big embarrassment. Well, kids need to learn how to be vulnerable. It's one of my biggest things I teach in team building is the art of vulnerability.
And being real.
And being real and authentic.
And authentic, yeah. I think there's not been an episode where we haven't talked about being vulnerable, being real, being authentic, and maybe I'm going to have that. We should have that put on our headstones when we leave.
Yeah.
And that can be our last bit of advice as we're pushing Daisy someday. Brian Kenney just shared an experience that our listeners can learn from. Those 5 suggestions, those things can help you survive and thrive, just like Brian did through his gambling disorder. So that was kind of our call to action. His suggestions were reach out for support, call a trusted friend or a family member, distract yourself with other activities, postpone gambling, play that tape forward, give yourself some time. This will allow that urge to pass. Certainly stop for a moment and consider what will happen. That's actually the part where it's play the tape forward. Consider what's going to happen if you put that bet down, or you made reference to if you're in sobriety, what's going to happen if I'm just going to pick up one drink. It doesn't end well, even for gambling, as you've mentioned. Even if you win, you lose, and then avoid isolation. So as we close another great episode of Survive and Thrive, 8791, are there any final thoughts, Brian? This has been some great content today.
I would say probably a final thought is go back to the canoe. I think a lot of kids, I go back to kids because everything I do supports youth. Mm-hmm. I was a servant educator, and I want to serve kids. Right now I'm in officiating. I want to serve officials. The canoe has to be moving. You just got to keep moving. Even if you're struggling, you just have to keep going forward and think about the outcome. The income is in the outcome. I think that's so important, and do hard things, hard.
Yeah, I love it. And I actually got in my notes here that I did want you to talk about Team Extreme. Quick, I know I will put all of Brian's contact information, his website, his phone number, his email. You're going to get that in after this episode airs. But can you just talk about Team Extreme quick?
I think my business is if you tipped a stool upside down and it had 3 legs, that would be my business. Leg number 1 is I'm really into writing right now. I feel like writing is therapy for me. And then I can share all my stories from the best 10 years I've had since 10 years old all the way up to 52. There's just so much to share. So I really like writing. I love doing hands-on team building workshops with school-aged youth. So I work with elementary, middle, and high school kids. I also enjoy sports teams. I absolutely love what I do to support sports teams with customized team building workshops. And everything I do is mobile. So teams don't have to get to a ropes course. They don't have to get to a certain location and deal with transportation logistics. I come right to them. And then I work with the coaches or the school counselors in the schools to kind of customize everything I'm going to do, find themes if we need to, and then I look at the activities that I'm going to do with the kids, and I make it very real and relevant. And then the last thing that I really like to do is I'm really getting into keynote presenting. I feel like I have so many stories, and I can relate things back to whatever an organization's mission and vision are. I can weave everything that I do into that, and I can talk about just about anything in front of an audience. So I'm really getting into those 3 things: the book writing, the hands-on team building, and keynoting.
What you talked about today is it helps across all kinds of party lines, from the leadership to the recovery stuff, to the team building stuff. And again, listeners, if you are wanting to get Brian Kenney's information, we will have that. I will get that out to people and probably try to link them in the comments somewhere. So on our next episode, we will have another amazing guest who will share how they survived and thrived. If you have a story to share, or you know someone who does, please reach out to me at tdecora@gmail.com. Until next time, hang in there with whatever you happen to be going through, and with hard work, dedication, and determination, you can survive and thrive. Until next time, take care.